Caught me playing one of my favorite hymn tunes of all time, although it may normally sound a little bit different from what I just played, and we're going to talk about how we get there from a tune that you might know as the Sacred Harp tune Restoration, or if you attend church, you might have sung this as Come Ye Sinners Poor and Needy. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about the original tune, where it comes from, how it's normally heard and played nowadays, how we arrive at the version I just played, which is one break that I commonly play with my band when we perform this tune, and let's talk in general about some neat hexatonic scale patterns from which we can draw new material to use in playing like this. You may have noticed that I am not in standard tuning. I am in fact in double C, which is a really lovely tuning that you'll hear a lot in the playing of Jens Kruger. If you're a clawhammer player, you are, of course, absolutely not unfamiliar with this tuning. But in terms of three-finger Scruggs style players, I'm most associated with Jens Kruger. Many other players have a tune or two in this tuning, but Jens tends to use it fairly prolifically for compositional purposes, and I have some theories on why that I might also talk about later. You might know. That is, of course, up 18 North, which is one of my favorite tunes by the Kruger brothers. It's played in double C tuning and actually introduces a lot of really good chord figures that shapes that I will not be teaching you today, especially these simple shell voicings that you can simply walk up and down the neck. We won't talk about that today. It's not going to appear, but worth knowing that it exists. So let's talk about the tune, the hymn tune. Normally, when it's sung by a congregation, is sung in 4/4, and it usually sounds something like this. And you have this notated, by the way, in the tab. This is actually the first thing that occurs in the tab for today. So the tune is. From memory and slightly inaccurate, but you have the tab at your disposal. So that's the tune. Now, how do we get from there to what I played at the beginning of this video? Well, the first thing that I've done is that I've put this into 6/8, and I've done that in consultation with the band I play in the interest of making it sound a little bit more Celtic, of enabling us to add some slightly more driving rhythmic patterns to it, to make it make aural sense to play it a little bit faster, right? So we want this to be a tune that's fun and exciting to listen to, a little bit less dirge-like. I normally hate that appellation. It doesn't sound like a dirge when it's done well in 4/4. But to make it sprightly, right? So in order to kind of get into the feeling of 6/8, let's just talk about some simple picking patterns that we can use on the 5-string when we're in double C and we're playing in 6/8. So let's assume we're in C, and in fact we're in C minor, right? I should have mentioned that much earlier. This tune is in C minor. There's a C minor chord, okay? It's very easy in double C. Double C is nice for many reasons, some of which, again, I'll talk about later in the video. When I explain to you why you should go home and play with double C quite a bit in your practice, in your free play in particular. And if you don't have free play in your practice, you should. But one reason that it's very interesting, very nice, is very carefully calculated, is that you have an octave and a fifth, right? So you have do, so, do, the first scale degree, the fifth, and then the first scale degree again, which we normally call the tonic, right? So the tonic, the dominant, and the tonic again. And then at the top, you have the ninth scale degree, the second scale degree, re. So it's non-committal in terms of modality. It's neither major nor minor. It really allows you easily to play both, and so in that respect, it's like sawmill, and you could think of it as a derivation of sawmill tuning. If you're not familiar with sawmill tuning is this, and it's going to be often used. It's really hard to do, actually, in double C. You might associate it with songs like, like Little Sadie and the like. Lots of old, good sort of clawhammer era fiddle tunes are played when they're in G minor, or they have that kind of Aeolian or Dorian sound, and they're going to be played out of sawmill tuning. And so I think probably most of us have played with that, even as three-finger players. This just lowers the D of sawmill tuning to a C. And so you want to play in C, and it's really natural to play in C. And it allows you, as I noted, to play in C major, or in, as I did earlier, in C minor. So a picking pattern that we might want to use playing in C minor and double C is the following. All right, so that's going to be a low C, the fifth string, and then we're going to play 2 3 2. You have this notated on your tab, actually, towards the beginning of the tab, just after the basic melody. And if you play this for a while, emphasizing the low C every time you come to it, you should start to gain an appreciation for what it feels like to play in 6/8 in this tuning. If you want to, you can add, you'll note there's a variant of this provided, you can actually add the third string after the fourth string. So that would sound like... And this is nice because it leads to very easy backup in C. Not so easy in other keys in terms of backup. And you can play in many keys out of double C just like you can out of standard tuning. But backup is particularly easy when you're in C minor, C major. So, and you can sort of achieve this by just emphasizing certain bass notes, right? Something like that, right? Whatever the chord progression is. Now, I leave that up to you. I don't mark what chords my band tends to play along with the break that I provided you with. This tune, being a shape note tune, as I mentioned, it's called Restoration, so you can look up the tune Restoration and see how it's commonly played. It's often played actually by clawhammer banjo players. The tune doesn't imply any particular chord progression. So tunes in the bluegrass canon often strongly imply certain chord progressions because they're essentially functional in the classical music sense of the word, right? So they really, you can listen to the tune, you kind of know exactly what chords should go over it. For a tune like this, you could practically play C minor the entire time and get away with it. You could throw in a G minor chord, the fifth chord, at certain junctures, and it really doesn't matter which or where. But if it implies anything, it really doesn't imply anything beyond a 1 chord and a 5 chord, a C minor chord, and maybe a G minor chord, right? Or instead of the G minor, you could substitute the flat 7, right? So, C minor, maybe that's your cadence. Something like that. So I leave it up to you to experiment with different ways of harmonizing this. It's almost impossible to go wrong, which is kind of what's fun about it, right? Lastly, let me show you this vamping pattern, which is similar to what's written in the tab. Right, so you can go right into it. And you can also mute occasionally if you want. You can try to mute with your picks. I'm not particularly good at muting with my picks without getting a lot of vibrating and buzzing, and that's probably going to go for most people if you're playing at full volume. So it's nice to mute with the left hand if you want to interject rests at nice junctures. Okay, so next we're going to go over a hexatonic scale pattern, which will lead your left hand through most of the shapes that I use in the break to this tune. So if you sort of practice the scale pattern, which goes like this, kind of like that, and then I provide you with fingering that goes back down as well. We'll talk about that in a moment. You'll notice your hand sort of participating in most of the interesting shapes and spots on the neck where this hexatonic scale occurs. And these shapes concomitantly occur in the tab. And so if you practice this, sorry about that mistake, then you'll become conversant in the shapes required to play the break, and the break will start to make sense to you a lot more, okay? So we're going to talk about that actually in my office, because I have to vacate our Christmas room so that my little 2-year-old can play in here because she's awake from her nap. So I'll see you in my office. I'm now firmly ensconced in my office. Cozily ensconced, one might say. So let's continue. So where were we? We played the break. We talked about the fact that this particular tune is in C minor. We're playing it in C minor, rather. It's not in any particular key. And that we're in double C. And double C is a very good tuning. That's about all we've said so far, right? I've encouraged you to play around with double C. I've shown you some basic picking patterns. These picking patterns are written out in your tab as the very second item. And I've told you that you can play some nice, easy backup in 6/8 using these picking patterns. Obviously, if you're going to add 2 bass notes per measure, you have to make some adjustments. But these are things you need to play around with. I'm not going to spell all of this out to you because I want you to hear in your head. Here's the sequence of events. Listen to good music. I don't want to qualify what I'm doing here as good music. Maybe it is to you, maybe you like it. If you like it, it's good music. Follow your taste. That's all you have. So you listen to good music, and that develops your inner ear. Your inner ear then plays music to you when you listen closely. And this is just a cognitive thing. We can all generate music in our head that we want to listen to, right? You listen to that, and then you adjust your fingers on the fretboard until you're able to achieve the sounds that you hear in your head. Therein lies all of the difficulty, and that's where technique comes from, and that's where playing things that may or may not be to your taste comes into play. Preferably things that are to your taste, but even things that are not immediately to your taste might contain patterns that will then get into your fingers, that will then make it easier to translate what you hear in your inner ear onto the instrument, because you might notice, oh, I've heard those 3 notes before in that sequence, and I think I played it in this particular tune, and I think the left-hand pattern was such and such, right? So this is why we learn repertoire. We learn repertoire not just for the sake of learning repertoire. There's a nice ancillary benefit in bluegrass, which is that we can then play with other people. And for some, that's the main goal. And it's a worthy and noble goal. If you're interested in composing, or you're interested in being able to play freely in music that is to your own taste, then there's another benefit, which is that learning repertoire gives you, eventually, after you've learned enough and you've spent enough time doing it, enough vocabulary for your left hand and your right hand that you are able to begin to connect what you hear to what you want to play, right? So all that being said, let's talk about where these notes and these patterns are coming from. I mentioned this scalar pattern. So it's in your tab, and it occurs right after the break, the transcription of the break. You'll see something that says something like hexatonic scalar pattern, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. And this is the source for all of the licks that occur in the break, although maybe the translation from the scalar pattern to what occurs in the break is a little bit less obvious. Then I provide you with a second break that more obviously quotes from the scalar pattern, just to show you that the scalar pattern on its own is quite beautiful, and you can include large, lengthy quotes from it in your soloing, and it'll be fine. So, all right, let's play that pattern. So that pattern starts open third string. That's your G. That's sol. And you can either hammer on if you're playing fast, or if you want to, you can pick. And if you want to pick in single string style, I would start with my index, thumb, index, thumb, index on the open second string, right? From there, I think the picking pattern should be fairly obvious. That's just going to be thumb, index, middle. Follow along on the tab if you need to know what frets I'm playing. So for that I play index, middle, index. And then for that I play middle, index, middle. All right, now we're in this nice position. We can do index, middle, and then thumb on the open fifth string. Now I just want to pause and talk about that. You could sort of never leave this position. You know, these third frets here are kind of all you need to play in C minor in double C and get a lot of effect, right? So I did slide up to that because I needed to. I could have just struck the fifth string, but I think I might have just used it as a drone note. So I slid up to the fifth string, to the fifth fret on the first string, which is the G, which is the same place it is in standard tuning, right? So this string, first string's not any different from standard tuning. Actually, the first and the third strings are the same. So any lick that you use that uses only the first and third strings, you still have access to. And so that might include, if you're familiar with the patterns and sixths that I believe Ricky talked about early in the week, you have access to those. Now that gets a little bit hairy when you get down there because we're trying to leave out the sixth scale degree, that A flat. We don't want to play that. And here's the reason why. This tune seems to be in it's a pentatonic tune, right? I believe. Yeah, it's pentatonic. So it's pentatonic. C minor pentatonic. Now, I give you a scalar pattern that includes a note that doesn't occur in the pentatonic scale. The minor pentatonic scale does not include which scale degree? Pause the video and answer. It doesn't include the second scale degree, right? So in this case, the pentatonic scale in C minor would be G, B flat, C, and then we skip from C to E flat, and then to F, and then to G, and then of course B flat, C. So that's the C minor pentatonic scale. It's worth learning. If you want to get a good, B flat, C, they're up here at the 10th fret on the second and first string. All right. So that's the pentatonic scale. I've given you a slight modification. We're including an extra note. We're including the 9th scale degree. We're including that D. So, and that I think is warranted by the melodic vocabulary of a lot of Irish and Celtic music, which, as I mentioned, was kind of an aesthetic goal of this arrangement, was to kind of sound Celtic-y, right? And so I think that merits this hexatonic scale. Pentatonic, 5, right? Penta in Greek means 5, hex means 6. And that's because when Proto-Indo-European kind of developed into Greek and into Latin, initial S's and Proto-Indo-European changed into kind of a h sound in the Proto-Hellenic dialects. So that's why we have hex in Greek and sex in Latin for six, if you've ever wondered about that, which I'm sure you haven't. So in any case, we're using a hexatonic scale, six notes, hexatonic minor, and we're putting them into groups of three. And that works well for us because we're in 6/8. You could reanalyze this in groups of four, I'm sure, and practice that, right? It'd be a little bit tricky, but you could do it. Yeah, you could do it. I think you might have to refinger it, and maybe we'll talk about that in the commentary videos, because you're not always going to be playing in 6/8. But in any case, it works here. And so I want you to spend a lot of time just practicing, first just practice the pattern literally. And then the reversal, which is, there's a lot of ways to reverse that. I've written it as, so that would be, with that slide in there, and if you want to, at the end, you can sort of continue down just a scale, a C minor scale. So again, something like that. So that's the pattern is written out, and you should practice that a lot. And I want you to notice there's several positions. There's the one we remarked upon earlier, where we're kind of using, when we're fretting anything, it's the third fret of the first three strings. Really nice and symmetric. Then there's this position, which kind of gives us access to, if we move our pinky down to the third string, we get the E flat. Our index finger is playing the F, which is on the second string. We have the fifth string giving us the G, and we have the B flat on the first string. And then our last position is just the 10th fret, the 10th fret of the first two strings. You'll notice that I've given you different fingerings or different ways of realizing on the fretboard, on the way up and on the way down. I think that's because I have a slight preference, ascending and descending, but really it's just so that I can show you that there's two ways of playing some of these patterns. They kind of overlap in the middle, right? So in the middle, for instance, you can play E flat, F, G there, or you can play it here. And they're both options, and they're both great. I also want to let you know that if you're advanced enough to kind of be interested and familiar with closed position melodic patterns that include the fifth string, we have those in double C as well. So like, if you want to extend this further, you probably will have to use them because you kind of run out of open strings to leverage in the pattern. So for instance, I'm gonna just let you observe the fretboard here. If you use the G at the 17th fret of the first string, and then you fret the second string at the 15th fret and the fifth string at the 15th fret, and I'd use my index finger, I wouldn't wrap my thumb around for this, use my index finger. And then you play first, fifth, second, you have a pattern that you can continue down, for a fair ways. And there's really three, as usual, right? There's going to be three different patterns because there's three different ways of combining, of sequencing, whole steps and half steps. And so these are going to be your patterns, where you have two frets separating the initial note, and these are on the same fret. Here you are occupying all three frets. So this is going to be 15th on the first string, 13th on the fifth string, 14th on the second string. And then here's your last pattern, where there's only one fret separating the two columns. So you have 13th fret on the first string, 12th on the fifth, and 12th on the second. So that's going to be and so on and so forth, and I'll leave it as an exercise for you to find the rest of the scale going down. You can probably tell I don't usually play that pattern. I don't use it very much. I don't solo a lot in double C yet. It's not often called for in jams. Although I found myself increasingly using double C in jams on tunes where probably most people would use standard tuning just because, just to experiment, just to see what happens. In any case, that's your scalar pattern. Practice it, get used to it, and then begin to improvise little melodies out of it. Now let's look back at the break. So the break. So you can start with a pinch, or you can slide from the B flat to the C. There's a lot of grace notes in this. You just heard one. So that a lot of grace notes that may sound like triplets, they may sound like grace notes. We spent a lot of time, the Lickmeisters did, debating notation for this. I don't currently have a computer I can notate on, so Max Allard was helping me notate this, and Cassidy and Max and I spent a long time, and I cannot exaggerate how much time we spent debating the correct way to notate this, because the way it sounds when realized at tempo is perhaps one thing, and no notation scheme can ever exactly capture, you know, what you're playing at an atomic level. But what I have in my mind, and what I think the structure that underlies the realization is another thing. And so in my mind, that fifth string there is just sort of a ghost note. It's not part of the pattern. And you'll notice that most of the solo is constructed out of interjecting melody notes on the downbeats, and then on the third eighth note of the beat, a fifth string might occur, optionally, right? I don't even know if you can hear it. I'm playing it very soft right now, on the third eighth note of each figure. And that's kind of the pattern that underlies, you know, playing a melodic break, meaning by which I just mean a break with a melody, with a clear melody. Melody front and center as opposed to licks front and center in double C tuning. And then there's a grace note, right? But when it's played up to tempo, it might not sound like fifth string grace note, fifth string ghost note followed by grace notes. It might sound instead like triplet, fifth string all the way down to the third string. And if that's the way you hear it, that's fine. So I won't belabor the notation anymore beyond using that as an example to help you to understand that the notation is just a tool, and it doesn't have any independent like epistemic reality, or rather any ontological reality. It's just a tool to help you visually to understand what's going on musically. And what's going on musically is something that you have in your mind, or I have in my mind. What I have in my mind is that when the fifth string occurs, it's usually not part of any kind of figure, it's not part of the music, it's not part of the melody, it doesn't participate in grace notes. It's just there as a mechanical prop, because either I'm trying to fill space, or I'm just trying to keep a roll pattern going so that my hand feels natural while I'm playing this, right? All right, so so here we're using the E flat that's on the third string. You'll recognize that from the scalar pattern. But here we're sliding up to it. So that's E flat on the third string, and then open first and second string. Isn't that nice? Or fifth string grace notes. For classical musicians, a cacciatura. And then we're implying a B flat, right? So now here we have an ascending pattern. We're going to use You'll recognize that from the scalar pattern. Now we're sliding up, right? So this is all from that scalar pattern. Now that's just a roll that's just filling in harmony. You'll notice it is D, F, G. So it might be implying like a G minor 7 chord, which would be the 5 chord in C minor. I don't really think there's a lot going on harmonically in this, though, as I mentioned earlier. So it's really just to fill space. Now this note doesn't occur anywhere in the scalar pattern, right? This is a G. We're in the scalar pattern, we're exclusively using the 5th string for that. But because it's a melody note and it's accented, I'm not going to play that with the 5th string. That would be odd. It would be unidiomatic, right? So I have to use this G or this G. By the way, note that in double C, unisons are only a second apart, which is kind of interesting to note. Okay, so there's my G. Now that B flat there on the 1st string does occur in the scalar pattern, so you'll recognize it. I just have a different finger on it now. I have, instead of my pinky, right, I have my middle finger on it. And notice again, the way we're building this is we're just playing the melody. The same melody that I showed you at the very beginning of the tab. We're just playing the melody, but we're interjecting open 5th string. I mean, that's really, you could play the whole thing that way, right? So that was just a very slight elaboration of the melody, but mostly I was using my index finger to pick out the melody as it was tabbed out at the beginning of this tab, and then on the 3rd eighth note of each beat, we're in 6/8, so each beat has 3 eighth notes. I was just playing an open 5th string. That's all I was doing. So you can already get a lot of what the break consists of just through that trick, that arrangement trick. And all of the rest of the fun comes from grace notes. Right? Grace note patterns, you know, what the French in the Baroque period called agrément, you know, decorations, right? So we're just decorating it with these duple and triple grace notes. And so that's the break. I think that's all we really need to say about the break itself. The last bit of fun consists in okay, so let's acknowledge, like, those positions, with a few exceptions, they're just derived from that scalar pattern. So if you practice that scalar pattern, you're familiar with it, you'll know C minor pentatonic and really C minor hexatonic in, in double C. Great. And a lot of those patterns come from that. But if you want an intermediate level between quoting the melody with no decoration and playing the melody with excessive decoration, like I do in my break to this piece, then there is a middle ground, and that consists in quoting from the scalar pattern more directly, just substituting it in. It's kind of like this principle that I've talked about a lot in the commentary videos, where commonly in minor tunes, in standard tuning, a great way, a common way to play a solo that has a lot of excitement is to spend the first half of the break kind of stating the melody, more or less directly, standard way of playing it. And then to use the second half of the break to just play some chromatic, pentatonic, bluesy nonsense, right? So this is kind of like that, except that we have a lot more space to fill. We've got 16 bars instead of 8. And so we have to be a little bit more judicious in how we do that. And so tabbed out for you in your tab, as I think the last item there, is one way of doing that. And I'll see if I can remember what I wrote. But it's not the only way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. And so this is where you need to experiment, and you need to have fun with this, and you need to play, right? So this is not about learning some, and I'm making it really hard for you to just learn a lick and walk away and think you know something, because if you just learn a lick, you don't know anything, right? So something we talked about in our commentary videos last night is that a lick, as I think most people think about a lick, it's kind of like a quote in literature. You know, so you're not going to learn English by memorizing Shakespeare and Hemingway quotes. In fact, memorizing a Shakespeare or Hemingway or Salinger, I don't know, I keep thinking of Faulkner, 20th century American authors, Dickens quotes, this is not going to help you to learn English, and it's going to be a little bit awkward to try to figure out how to insert those into conversation. Or even formal writing, naturally. It's just awkward. It's too big a unit of vocabulary. Instead, you want to be thinking probably as a language learner in terms of individual words. So maybe here's a word. Maybe that's a word, or something like that, or that's a word, right? That's a word, or that's a word. A word might just be a few notes strung together. I'm making this up. There's no concrete equivalent here. Words, or maybe what in linguistics we call collocations. In each language, there are words that tend to occur together. So these are bigrams or trigrams, 2 or 3 words that tend to occur together very commonly. What are some examples of those? Gas station. Gas station is a collocation. Go home is a collocation. If you're learning another language, you'll find that if you try to translate go home directly, you'll run into trouble because every language has a different way of expressing that. So there's something about English where go and home is a common collocation. What's another good example? Wood fence, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of examples of this, and I'm coming up short at the moment. But these are words that tend to occur together and which don't translate literally to other languages. And so there's something about them where you just have to memorize it. If you want to sound natural and idiomatic speaking that language, you have to know word A tends to come before word B, and that's a pair. They come as a pair, or A, B, and C come together. And it's exactly the same on the banjo. I'm not in standard tuning, so I can't show you the usual suspects here. But a collocation is another way to think about things, right? So, I don't know, in this tune, it might be, I don't know, maybe that's a collocation. It's about the length of a collocation. That's not necessarily a standard collocation, but it's the length of one. So this is the length we need to be thinking of. Quotes, licks, too much. It's too big. So I've made it difficult, as I was saying, for you to come away from this simply having memorized a lick and think that you've achieved something. Instead, you have to work with a scalar pattern, and you have to understand the scalar pattern. You have to try to fit it into other things. And so here's one way to do that. Let's start by just stating the melody. So there's the melody roughly from the first part of the break, except that instead of sliding up to that E flat, I just hammered on. Actually, I just picked it. So now let's start the scalar pattern. Why should we start it now? Well, because we just hit a G. It seems like the scalar pattern starts on a G, and let's see what happens if we just start it right there. So. And I can kind of feel that once I get to that point, I shouldn't keep going because I feel that I've reached a structural point. And if you check the tab, you'll note, yes, Sam, you have reached a structural point. That's the 8th bar. And that's the halfway point of the break. So that's a good place to maybe stop that pattern, right? So let's see what that sounds like. And that's the tricky part. That's the part that you can't teach. You just have to, as you get memorized, you just have to learn by doing, okay? So, and what that involves is being able to hear time. You have to hear the future. You have to hear that if I went any further, I would be intruding into the second half of the break or the structure. Or you might have to hear, if I play 2 more, and I'm abstracting here to maybe like a standard bluegrass tune. If I play 2 more bars, I'll end up in the D chord, and I don't. This lick can't go that long. This is a C chord lick, so I actually only have 1 more bar. So I actually need to finish it in the next 4 beats or 2 beats or whatever, right? That sounds intimidating. It is. It's tricky. It's difficult. And there's only one way to get there, and that is to sit at your computer, to bring up backing tracks and to try, it's going to sound terrible at first, but to try to just play pieces of vocabulary and licks and little things that come to your mind over the backing track to some tune that you know a real break to, right? So maybe start by playing the break along the first time through the backing track. And if you don't know this, these backing tracks exist in YouTube in droves, so you can find these easily. So maybe just play, if you know, so maybe you know break to Blue Ridge Cabin Home. Pull up the backing track, play a break to Blue Ridge Cabin Home. You've gone through it one time now. Now try to play something that's not that break, just vocabulary. Again, I'm not in standards, so I can't illustrate. And listen to the chord progression unfold, and pay attention to when you're playing a G lick and it's moved on to C, or you're playing a C lick and it's moved on to D. Note that, and just keep going. There's nothing more you can do than note that and mark to your brain, and it'll mark this automatically. Ooh, I'm playing the wrong chord over the wrong, or the wrong lick over the wrong chord. And I think that what happens very naturally is the brain learns how to listen ahead to what's going to happen and try to prevent these kinds of accidents from occurring. This is the only way to do it, is to just make a lot of mistakes at home with backing tracks. This is really the only way. This is an invaluable kind of practice. And the nice thing is these backing tracks come in all tempos. So if you're wondering, how I knew, okay, we've reached the end of the first 8 bars and I need to just stop on that G, it's from a lot of time spent doing what I just described. Really, there's no shortcuts. All right, so now we've made it there. So now we're going to start a little bit that doesn't come from anything I've taught you. This is the sixth that Ricky has talked about and that you might just know about. And again, these are going to be the same as in standard tuning. These are 6 between the 3rd string and the 1st string. So I'm on the 12th fret of the 3rd string, 13th fret of the 1st string. And we're going to play, we have an option. You can play a backwards roll, so 1st, 3rd, 5th. Sounds like that. That's what that would sound like. Or you can play 1st, 5th, 3rd. Makes the shift a little bit difficult. And the reason is because you have to shift and you just played the 3rd string, and the 3rd string is one of the frets you're shifting, right? So maybe that's not the best choice. Maybe backwards roll is the right choice here. We're playing around. We're experimenting, right? So this is the kind of thing you need to be doing on your own, is just trying things out and seeing what happens, okay? You could also see if you could do 3rd. Yeah, you could do 3rd, 5th, 1st if you wanted to. Could you do anything else? 3rd, 1st, 5th, maybe? That's nice. So I think your best options are 3rd, 1st, 5th. If that's the melody you want, G, F, E flat, D, maybe that's the melody you want. Or if you want the 1st string to carry the melody, then you should start with the 1st string. And then I think your best option is the backwards roll, 1st, 3rd, 5th. Which is going to be E flat, D, C, B flat, right? So those are your 2 options there. Now we've just filled 2 bars. And the reason we filled 2 bars is because it felt like maybe 2 bars is a good amount to fill. And we're hoping that if we now start the scalar pattern going down on the C, that we'll end up in a good place. And I think that'll be the case. Let's try that. All right, so that's promising. Let's try it. Uh-oh, I can hear that we have a lot more bars left, and if we just continue down, then we're going to end too soon. So what do we need to do? Let's start that pattern over. We'll start it over. So now we start it over on the G. We still have a bar left. So sometimes you're going to get to the end of a pattern like we did there. So let me show you how that sounds. And you're going to realize, uh-oh, if I just end on that C, I think the band's going to keep playing for another bar or 2, and it's going to be awkward. And you need to be able to hear that. And the only way to hear that is familiarity with the tune, with the chord progression, with the structure, which again, is just going to involve playing backing tracks usually for the standards. For a tune like this, it might only occur in a jam session with your own band where you're trying to work the tune out. and you just get familiar with how many bars you have left by having made a lot of mistakes, where you end something too early, right? That's how you develop that inner ear that's, again, listening forward in time. So here's the whole break. Sorry. A little bit messy, but that's the idea behind that break that we just put together. So that will occur in your tab as the last thing shown. And again, there's many other ways to do this. So, the scalar pattern that I gave you is 8 bars long. So you could just substitute it, for the second half, for instance, or you could play 4 bars, play the whole thing in the middle, and then end with 4 bars. I'll bet you those would both sound quite inelegant. Let's see what that would sound like. Sorry, let me try that again. And now you can feel you have 4 bars left, and so what would you do? I don't know, you'd make up something to fill in the rest of those 4 bars. And if I had the tab for the break in front of me, I could recover perhaps what naturally would have occurred in the break in those 4 bars. But interestingly, I don't have access to the last 4 bars of the break independently of the rest of the break. And that's because I played this particular break so often that the memory of the next bar or two is triggered by what I just played. So I can't simply jump in this case, to bar 13 and expect to be able to do that. It doesn't work that way. And that's okay. I think this is another thing we've talked about a lot, actually kind of offline, the Lickmeister. Your Lickmeisters have been talking about how maybe we need to de-emphasize improvisation a little bit and bluegrass. It's a great skill to have. Even the best improvisers make a lot of mistakes. That is, play something that is not what they imagined happening or realizing, that didn't quite match their inner ear. And we don't realize that as listeners, but that's happening all the time. They're just able to react to it in real time. But it gives the impression that a good improviser can simply, immediately go from their inner ear to the fretboard or the keyboard on a piano without any difficulties or anything being lost in translation. So that's maybe myth number one. But the other myth is that when you listen to the great bands, from Flatt and Scruggs through, to the Bluegrass Album Band, really anything that's been recorded on an album, and we hear a great break and we think, oh man, they improvised that. Very often they did not. Very often they worked that break out either at home, in the woodshed, or in the recording studio during 15 takes that weren't successful until they finally hit upon the structure of solo that they actually wanted recorded, right? And then any number of scenarios in between. But most of the time, a great band that solos or lets its members solo is going to see those soloists playing things that are, with very few changes, almost identical to what they played the night before and the night before, or what they played at home any number of times. And so working breaks out in advance is not taboo. It's a very bluegrass thing to do, okay? And so we need to be comfortable. I mean, we are, people that are sort of at a high amateur professional level are comfortable with that and do it all the time, but I'm not sure if that's always communicated to beginner and intermediate players, that that's what's going on. And when improvisation does happen, it's often just slight detours or variations or substitutions from the kind of prototypical version of the break that the player has in their head, where there's some piece of vocabulary that, for instance, one that I find myself comfortable substituting is substituting that rather dramatic slide, which can be difficult to realize and ensure that E flat is audible to the audience, substituting that for that E flat that's on the second string that's really sonorous, where you can really get a nice neck vibrato going and, you know, and make that shimmer and shine. And so that's a bad example. There's better examples in standard tuning, but I think what is most often happening improvisatorily when the great soloists are playing is that they're playing something that's more, even if they don't realize it, there's more or less what they normally play on that tune, or in tunes with the same chord progression, with some slight licks varied, some slight pieces of vocabulary substituted for others. This video has gone on long enough, so I'll leave you there. I hope that you've enjoyed this piece. I hope that you like this tune. I suppose I promised you two bits of lore that I haven't mentioned yet. One is where this comes from. So the words, so this is commonly called "Come Ye Sinners." To anybody who goes to church and has sung this tune, that's what it's going to be known to them as, the hymn "Come Ye Sinners," which was written, I forget the name of the hymnodist, but it was written in the 18th century by a Calvinist minister. And it floated around for some time, as was common in the 18th century, without any one tune associated with it. So more often than not, you'd have books with hymn texts printed, and then some indication at the top as to what the metrical structure of the hymn is, and then you sort of knew, you know, as a musician or as a congregation, as a pastor, you knew what tunes would fit that metrical structure, and they could be varied at will. So you could call out, you know, a particular hymn and then a particular tune, and then the congregation might sing it, or the singing master might lead them in it. In the 19th century, in the tradition known as sacred harp or shape note singing in the United States, which was a way of, or originated much earlier in England, but was a way of teaching and enabling congregations to sing in harmony on a regular basis. A tune called Restoration, the tune that we just learned, was associated very closely with the text, which has the title "Come Ye Sinners." And so that's how it's normally sung nowadays, but that's because of the shape note tradition that it came out of. And in the shape note tradition, it just sounds very like wild and American and folksy and sometimes Celtic. You know, these are imprecise, but it's what comes to mind. Just absolutely incredible melodies and very vague harmonies. They're not functional in the sense that like Western music usually is, you know, where it's like you start at the one chord, you play some other chords, and then there's a 5 chord, and you come back to the 1 chord. If that means something to you, you don't find that in sacred harp singing. If it doesn't mean anything, you don't worry about it. And so that's the tune. I told you I'd tell you about that. Secondly, double C, why I think it's better than standard tuning for solo banjo playing. And that is because of this low C. And so when you're playing as a soloist, meaning you're not playing with a band, you want to imply certain harmonies. You really need to have a lot of space between the lowest note of the chord and the melody. And that's just a principle of traditional harmony. And standard tuning makes it very difficult to do that without big stretches. But this tuning makes it very easy, right? So here is a really, really harmonically nice shape. You know, this is just a bar across the 5th fret, and then my pinky's playing the 7th fret 1st string, and that's an F chord. Or you could fret the 2nd string at the 7th fret as well. You have these really nice chord shapes that are harmonically convenient and harmonically fitting, and Jens uses these quite a bit, right? Right, so that's all using these shapes, but just the shell voicing version where you don't actually bar, and you leave the inner 2 strings 2 and 3, open, and you're just fretting the 4th and the 1st string. And so that's not possible in standard, well, those, that particular voicing is possible in standard tuning, but it involves a much bigger stretch. And so that's the sacrifice. And if you're playing in C, you have the low C available to you. But if you're playing in G, in standard G tuning, the lowest G you have is this one. You don't have the low G. So you really can't create depth in your harmonies. So these are things that I've noticed, and I think others that like to play solo, like Jens Kruger and Max Allard, have noticed this as well. And when they compose pieces for solo banjo, you notice that they reach for double C tuning or variations of it. Maybe Max will tune the 5th string down to E, or maybe he'll take double C and he'll put it down to B flat or to A or to A flat, right? So we'll tune it down, but it is essentially the same intervals as double C. So that is my perhaps inarticulate plug for double C as a tuning for solo banjo, and I'll leave you with that. Merry Licksmas.